The underdocks of Erythroprime were always alive with noise. Steam rose from broken pipes, covering the air with a thin white fog. The ground shook with the sound of heavy machines, and the smell of rust, oil, and sweat filled every corner. This was not a place for the rich. This was a place for the desperate, the broken, and the forgotten. Kelvin Rohr walked slowly through the market streets. He was a tall human with dark hair cut short, his eyes calm and sharp. He wore a simple jacket and heavy boots, but there was something about him that made people move aside. He was not rich, he was not powerful, but he walked with a steady control that made others notice. All around him, cages lined the walls. Each cage held slaves, aliens from many worlds. Some were strong and muscular, ready to be bought as guards or fighters. Others were small and fragile, sold as servants or worse. The sellers shouted prices, their voices rough. Buyers moved from cage to cage, pointing, laughing, bargaining. For most, this was just another day. But in one dark corner, half hidden by shadows, there was a small cage. Inside sat a girl, an alien with thin arms and pale skin. Her hair was dirty and tangled, her face covered in bruises. When she looked up, her teeth showed broken and uneven. She pulled her knees close to her chest and tried to make herself invisible. The sign above her cage read, 2 credits only, barely $2 in human money. Nobody looked at her for long. Some buyers stopped, laughed, and walked away. Not worth even a scrap of metal, one man sneered. She's already broken, another woman said, shaking her head. To the market, she was nothing, less than nothing. Kelvin stopped, his eyes falling on the cage. The girl noticed and quickly turned her head away. She had learned long ago that eye contact only brought more pain. But Kelvin did not move on. He kept standing there, watching her. The slave master noticed him and rushed over. Human, human, the man shouted. Don't waste your time here. Look at these strong ones. He pulled at the bars of another cage, showing a tall warrior alien with shining muscles. Only 50 credits. He can kill 10 men for you. Then he pointed at another cage. This one cooks, cleans, sings, whatever you want. Kelvin stayed quiet, his gaze fixed on the small, broken girl in the shadows. The master grew impatient. Listen, she is nothing, he said, spitting on the ground. Worthless, no use, only kept her because I hate wasting space. He laughed and slapped the bars of her cage, making her flinch. She is 2 credits too, the price of cheap wine. The girl closed her eyes, waiting for the human to walk away like all the others. But instead, Kelvin's voice was calm and clear. I'll take her, he said. For a moment, the noise of the market seemed to quiet. The master blinked in surprise. You want her? Why? She's trash. But Kelvin reached into his pocket, pulled out the credits, and placed them in the master's hand. Open the cage, he said. People nearby started laughing. A human buying trash? One shouted. He wasted his money. Another jeered. Even the slave master shook his head. Your loss, human, but I'll take your credits. The cage door creaked open. The girl did not move. Her thin body shook as she pressed herself deeper into the corner. She thought this was a trick. She thought the beating would start soon. Her broken teeth showed as she bit her lip, trying not to cry. Kelvin crouched down, his voice low but steady. Come, he said, you're safe now. The girl did not believe him, but she moved slowly, crawling out of the cage. Her legs were weak, and she nearly fell. Kelvin caught her before she hit the ground, his grip firm but gentle. The crowd laughed louder, but he ignored them. He placed his jacket over her shoulders and began to walk away. The girl looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. She had never seen kindness before, never felt warmth. And now, for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her life was not over. The market noises still rang behind them as Kelvin walked through the narrow streets. The alien girl stumbled beside him, her body weak and unsteady. She kept looking down at the ground, afraid to meet his eyes. The jacket he had placed around her shoulders felt heavy, almost strange, because no one had ever given her warmth before. Kelvin said nothing as they moved away from the traders. He walked with a steady pace, guiding her gently whenever she tripped. The crowd that had laughed at him faded into the distance, but their words still echoed in her ears. Worthless trash, not even a real slave. Each insult had been carved into her soul long before today, and she had learned to believe them. Finally, they reached the edge of the underdocks, where the air was cleaner and the streets less crowded. The girl paused, expecting him to turn and hand her off to someone else. Maybe he had only bought her to sell her later. Maybe he wanted to use her until she broke completely. Her mind could not understand another reason, because kindness had never been part of her life. Kelvin stopped and looked at her, his face calm but unreadable. "You need food," he said, his voice low, "and rest." The words confused her, because no master had ever cared if she ate or slept. Masters only cared if she worked, obeyed, or bled when they wanted it. They entered a small shop with dim lights and the smell of fresh bread. The shopkeeper glanced at them with suspicion, staring at the alien girl with disgust. "Humans with pets," he muttered under his breath, but Kelvin ignored him. He bought a loaf of bread, some soup in a container, and a bottle of clean water. Then he placed the food in front of the girl, guiding her to sit at a quiet corner table. She hesitated, her trembling hands hovering over the bread. Was this a trick? If she ate without permission, would he strike her? She glanced at him nervously, and he gave a small nod. "Eat," he said simply. She tore a piece of bread and chewed slowly, the taste filling her mouth with warmth she hadn't known in years. Tears burned her eyes as she drank the water, each sip almost painful because her throat was so dry. Kelvin watched silently, not rushing her, not speaking, just letting her eat. For the first time in so long, she ate until she was full, and it felt almost like a dream. When they left the shop, the night air was colder. The girl pulled the jacket tighter around herself, still expecting that sooner or later the kindness would end. Kelvin led her to a small building, his own home, simple and worn down, but it was clean. Inside was a narrow bed, a table, and a single chair, nothing fancy, but it was more than any cage. She stood frozen near the doorway, afraid to move. Kelvin set the food bag on the table and looked at her. "You can rest here," he said, pointing to the bed. Her heart jumped, panic rushing through her. Masters never let slaves sleep on beds. She expected punishment if she even touched it. I can sleep on the floor," she whispered, her voice cracked and soft. But Kelvin shook his head. "No, the bed is for you." He sat on the chair instead, taking off his boots, showing her that he meant it. The girl's legs trembled. She stepped forward, then backward, unsure. Finally, she lay on the edge of the bed, curled up like a child. The softness of the blanket shocked her. So warm, so gentle against her bruised skin. She tried to stay awake, waiting for the shouting or the strikes, but none came. Kelvin sat quietly, his arms folded, his gaze calm, as if watching over her. For the first time in years, her eyes closed without fear, and she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, the light of Erythra Prime's twin suns streamed through the small window. The girl woke slowly, confusion filling her mind, because she was not in a cage, she was not chained. She was on a bed, wrapped in a blanket, and her stomach was not empty. Her body ached, but she felt something she had forgotten. Safety. Kelvin was already awake, sitting at the table, eating quietly. He placed a small bowl of food in front of her when she sat up. "You can eat," he said, the same calm tone. Her hand shook as she picked up the spoon. She kept watching him, searching for the hidden cruelty she believed had to exist. But there was none, only patience. Finally, after eating in silence, she asked in a whisper, "Why me? Why by me? I am broken." Her words cracked like glass, her eyes wide with fear. Kelvin looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you deserve more than chains," he said, "and maybe I needed someone too." The words struck her heart harder than any blow ever had. She did not know if she could believe him yet, but deep inside, a small spark lit up. A spark she thought had died long ago. The spark of hope. The city outside was always alive with noise, but inside Kelvin's apartment, the world felt quiet. The alien girl sat on the bed, clutching the blanket tightly, her eyes darting around the small room. The walls were plain metal, the floor a little cracked, but it was clean, and there was no cage. To her, this place felt strange, almost unreal, like a dream that could break at any second. Kelvin moved around calmly, boiling water on a small stove. He placed 2 cups on the table, pouring the hot water over dry leaves, and the smell of tea filled the air. The girl watched in silence, still waiting for the hidden cruelty, still waiting for the command that would remind her she was nothing. But instead, Kelvin pushed 1 cup toward her, steam rising gently from it. "Drink," he said softly, and then he sat down opposite her. Her hands shook as she lifted the cup, the warmth surprising her. The liquid touched her lips, and the taste was soft, calming. She blinked quickly, almost afraid to enjoy it, because good things in her life had always been traps. But nothing happened. No slap, no harsh word, only silence and peace. For the first time, she dared to ask, "What do I call you?" Kelvin looked at her with steady eyes. "My name is Kelvin Roar," he said. "You can call me Kelvin." Her heart raced. No master had ever told her a real name. They only gave orders. "And you?" he asked. "Do you have a name?" She froze, her lips parting, but no sound coming. A name, she thought, something she had not spoken in years, something that had been beaten out of her. I don't remember," she whispered finally, shame filling her chest. Kelvin nodded, not pushing her. "Then we'll find one together," he said. The girl blinked, confused, unsure why her heart ached when she heard those words. She wanted to believe him, but the chains in her mind were stronger than iron. That night, after she had eaten again, Kelvin gave her space. He sat by the small window, writing notes in a worn journal. The girl curled up on the bed, hugging the blanket, her eyes watching him carefully. Every movement of his hand, every sigh, every pause. She studied it, searching for weakness, searching for the hidden cruelty she had always known in others. But it was not there, only patience, only silence, only calm. When she woke from a nightmare in the middle of the night, her body shaking and tears wetting her face, she expected shouts or punishment. Instead, Kelvin moved to her side, his voice steady. "It's all right," he said. "No one can hurt you here." He gave her water, and though his hand did not touch her, his presence alone was enough to push away the shadows of her dream. For the first time, she slept again, and the nightmare did not return. The following days passed slowly, each one stranger than the last. Kelvin never raised his voice, never lifted a hand against her. He cooked meals, left water for her, and even gave her clothes, simple and plain but clean. At first, she did not wear them, afraid they were a trap, but when he said nothing, she tried them on. The jacket hung loosely on her thin body, but for some reason, it made her feel safer. She began to move around the apartment cautiously, touching the walls, cleaning the table, even sweeping the floor. Not because she was ordered to, but because her heart told her to. Kelvin watched her quietly, a small smile on his face, but he never stopped her, never gave orders. For the first time in her life, her actions were her choice. Sometimes, Kelvin would leave for work in the city. He always locked the door behind him, not to trap her, but to keep others out. She would sit by the window, staring at the streets below. The world outside still looked cruel, but inside the small room, she began to feel something new. Safety. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned red, Kelvin placed a small package on the table. The girl tilted her head, curious, her hands hovering nervously. "Open it," he said, and she slowly unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a simple wooden comb, smooth and polished. Her breath caught, her fingers trembling as she touched it. She had not owned anything in years, not since before the cages. Her hair was tangled and messy, a reminder of her pain. But Kelvin's eyes were steady, "It's yours," he said. The words echoed inside her like thunder, and she whispered in disbelief, "Mine?" "Yes," he answered, "only yours." Her chest tightened, tears filling her eyes. The comb was small, cheap, almost worthless to anyone else. But to her it was more valuable than gold, because it meant she was seen as a person, not a slave. That night, she sat by the window, combing her hair slowly, carefully, as if touching treasure. And for the first time, she saw her reflection in the glass. Not a slave, not trash, but someone alive. Kelvin watched quietly, saying nothing, but inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The girl was still broken, still haunted by fear. Days passed quietly in Kelvin's small home. The alien girl still flinched at sudden noises, still avoided mirrors, still sat in corners with her knees pulled close. But slowly, something began to change. The air around her was no longer heavy with fear every hour. She began to look at Kelvin with cautious eyes, not just terror. He never raised his hand against her, never shouted, never chained her. Instead, he spoke in simple words, asking if she wanted food, asking if she wanted a rest. At first, she only nodded or shook her head, unable to use her voice. But Kelvin was patient, waiting, letting her choose silence if that was what she needed. One morning, she surprised him. She picked up a rag from the table and began to wipe the dust from the corner shelves. Her hand shook, but she cleaned with focus. Kelvin watched silently, and when she turned to see if she had done something wrong, he gave a small smile. "Thank you," he said softly. The words stunned her more than a strike would have, because no one had ever thanked her for anything. Later that day, she found a small cup of water on the table, left for her. When she drank it, Kelvin nodded. "Good," he said. "Drink more, it helps you heal." She touched her ribs where the bruises were fading slowly, and for the first time, she believed healing was possible. At night, she dreamed less of the cages and more of the quiet room. The blanket's warmth became something she trusted, not feared. And one evening, while Kelvin sat at the table fixing an old tool, she found herself speaking without meaning to. "My name," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "is Lyra." Kelvin looked up, his expression calm, but his eyes warm. "Lyra," he repeated, as if trying the word on his tongue. "That is a strong name." She froze, waiting for mockery or laughter, but instead he said it again, slower, gentler. "Lyra." Her chest tightened, and tears formed in her eyes, because she had not heard her name spoken kindly in years. She had been called slave, beast, trash, but never Lyra. That night, she slept with a strange new feeling in her heart. She belonged to herself again. The next morning, she rose earlier than usual. She took the rag once more, then began sweeping the floor with her bare hands. She even tried to prepare food, though she spilled half the water in panic when she thought Kelvin would be angry. But he only chuckled softly, cleaned up the mess with her, and showed her how to hold the pot steady. "You're learning," he said. "That is enough." Each small action built a thread of trust between them. When she placed a bowl in front of him, he accepted it with respect. When she whispered answers to his gentle questions, he listened without rushing her. And when she dared to sit across from him at the table, not curled in the corner, he did not comment. He simply acted as if she belonged there all along. One evening, the light outside dimmed to a soft red glow. Kelvin leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, and said, "Lyra, you are not a slave here." The words made her heart stop. She stared at him, her lips trembling. Not a slave? But what else could she be? She tried to argue, tried to say she was broken, useless, weak. But Kelvin shook his head slowly. "You're a family now," he said. The word family echoed in her mind, burning away years of coldness. She had no family. Her captors had stolen that from her. Yet here he was giving her a place, a role, a meaning. Her hands covered her face, and for the first time in front of him, she cried. The tears were not of pain or fear, but of release. Kelvin did not move closer, did not touch her, but his presence was steady, a wall of safety she could lean on without falling. From that night onward, Lyra changed. She no longer waited for him to order her. She offered. She no longer curled into corners. She sat where she could see the door, no longer trapped by it. And sometimes, when he spoke her name, she even smiled, though the smile was small and shy. But outside their quiet home, the city whispered. Rumors spread in the underdocks that a human had bought a worthless slave. Some laughed at him, others grew curious, and a few grew angry. Slave masters did not like hope given to broken things. Hope was dangerous, because hope could spread. Inside the small room, Kelvin and Lyra did not yet know that danger was coming. They only knew the fragile beginnings of trust, the seed of something stronger than chains. And though neither said it aloud, both felt the same silent truth. This was only the beginning of a bond that would change them both forever. The days turned into weeks, and Lyra grew a little stronger. Her bruises faded, her skin showed color again, and her eyes began to shine softly in the dim light of Kelvin's small home. She still spoke little, but when she did, her words carried more courage than before. Kelvin never pushed her to speak. He simply gave her space, food, and patience. But one night, the silence between them broke, and the past she had buried came flooding out. It was late, the city outside, quiet except for the distant hum of machines. Kelvin was fixing a broken tool at the table, his hand steady as always. Lyra sat on the floor, near the window, hugging her knees, staring at the stars that flickered weakly through the polluted sky. For a long time she said nothing. Then, in a voice as thin as smoke, she whispered, "Do you know why nobody wanted me?" Kelvin looked up, his face calm, but his eyes sharp with attention. He did not answer, waiting, letting her choose her own pace. Lyra swallowed hard, her broken teeth catching on her lip, and tears welled up before she could stop them. "They broke me," she said, "piece by piece, until I was nothing." Her words trembled as memories spilled out. She told him of her capture, raiders who had stormed her small village, taking the young and killing the weak. She spoke of chains around her wrists and ankles, dragging her across ships from one world to another, of masters who bought her, used her, then returned her when she was too weak, too thin, too damaged to be useful. She remembered the blows, the kicks, the hunger, and the laughter of those who watched her crawl for scraps. Her voice cracked when she told him how they broke her teeth, so she would never be sold as a pleasure slave. "They said it made me ugly, worthless," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. Kelvin set the tool down, his hand still, his eyes locked on her. He did not pity her. His gaze held something deeper, a quiet fire of respect for the strength it took to survive. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, "they try to break you, but you are still here." His words made her shake, because no one had ever called her survival strength, only weakness. She went on, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. She spoke of how other slaves stopped looking at her, afraid her bad fortune would touch them, of how masters mocked her, selling her again and again until even the markets grew tired. In the end, she was put in that corner cage for 2 credits, less than the price of stale bread. "That was all I was worth," she said bitterly, 2 credits. Kelvin leaned forward, his tone firm. "No, that was what they decided, not what you are worth." His words cut through the silence like a blade. Lyra stared at him, unable to understand. She had lived so long with chains that her value was only what her master said it was. But Kelvin's voice carried no doubt, no hesitation, only truth. "You're not a slave anymore. You're not broken. You are family," he said. The word family made her chest ache so deeply she pressed a hand against it. Her tears spilled freely now, soaking her face as sobs racked her thin body. For years, she had been forced to be silent, to bury the pain inside. Now it came out in waves, and she could not stop it. Kelvin did not move to touch her, but his presence was solid, a quiet wall of strength she could lean against without fear. When her sobs slowed, she wiped her face with trembling hands. Her voice was weak but steady. "Why are you doing this? Why did you choose me?" Kelvin's eyes softened, but his tone stayed calm. Because you needed someone to see you, and I needed someone to remind me what matters, he said. He leaned back, folding his arms. Maybe I was alone too long. Maybe I wanted family as much as you did. Lyra blinked at him, her tears drying into a silence heavy with meaning. For the first time, she believed him, even if only a little. She whispered, family, the word strange on her tongue, yet warm. It was a word she thought she would never use again, but now it lived between them, fragile but real. From that night, their bond grew stronger. Lyra no longer avoided speaking when she remembered something small. She began to hum quietly while cleaning, sometimes even daring to laugh at Kelvin's dry jokes. And though her past haunted her dreams, each time she woke, she found herself in a bed, not a cage, with safety around her. The past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. Yet outside, the city did not sleep kindly. Rumors of the human who bought a broken alien spread further. And in the dark corners of the market, the slave masters began to whisper plans. Hope was dangerous, and they could not allow one broken slave to become a symbol of change. Inside the small room, Lyra clung to her fragile hope, and Kelvin stood quietly by her side. Neither of them knew that the storm was coming closer. But for now, she had spoken her truth, and he had called. The peace inside Kelvin's small home could not last forever. Outside, the city was full of whispers, and whispers had a way of turning into sharp blades. The markets buzzed with laughter about the foolish human who had spent money on a broken alien. But behind the laughter, anger was growing, because hope was not good for business. Slave masters thrived on fear, on despair, on the belief that no one could escape their chains. If one alien found safety, if one broken life became something more, others might begin to dream. And dreams were poison to those who held the cages. So they sent watchers, men who followed Kelvin's steps, who noted where he lived, who studied when he left and when he returned. Inside the small home, Lyra felt the tension even before she understood it. She noticed the shadows moving in the street when Kelvin came back late. She noticed the way strangers stared at her when she carried water, their eyes full of disgust and warning. Her hands trembled each time she stepped outside, not from fear of Kelvin, but from fear of the world that still wanted to crush her. One night, as the suns dipped low and the streets emptied, the knock came. It was heavy, harsh, the kind of knock that demanded obedience. Kelvin looked at the door with steady eyes, but Lyra's heart raced, her body shrinking back into the corner. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a rough voice. "Open up, human, we know what you have." Kelvin stood, calm but firm, and opened the door slowly. 3 men stood there, their clothes marked with the red bands of the slave guild. Behind them, the streets smelled of smoke and iron. The leader, a tall man with scars across his face, sneered. "You bought something that doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "That thing in there belongs to the market, not to a soft-hearted fool like you." Kelvin's gaze didn't falter. "She was sold to me, legally," he said, his tone flat. The scar man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Legally? Don't insult me. Human, broken stock isn't for keeping, it's for burning out." He leaned closer, his breath foul. "Give her back. Maybe we let you walk away." Behind Kelvin, Lyra pressed herself against the wall, every word cutting into her like old chains. Her body shook, and for a moment, she believed she would be taken again, thrown back into cages, forgotten in the dark. Her throat ached with a scream she could not release. Kelvin did not move aside, his shoulders filling the doorway. "No," he said simply. The scarred man's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can protect her?" he hissed. "You think one man can fight the guild?" Kelvin's voice was calm but cold. "I don't think I know." The men pushed forward, but Kelvin struck first. His fist met the closest one's jaw with a crack, sending him stumbling back. The second swung a blade, but Kelvin dodged, grabbing his arm and twisting until the bone popped. The street filled with the sound of grunts, curses, and the sharp clash of metal. Inside, Lyra's hands clutched her chest, her eyes wide as she watched the human fight not for money, not for pride, but for her. The Scar Man lunged with a knife, aiming for Kelvin's side. Kelvin caught his wrist, the blade inches from his ribs, their eyes locking in raw fury. With a growl, Kelvin slammed his knee into the man's stomach, sending him crashing against the wall. The man spat blood and staggered, retreating as his companions pulled him away. "This isn't over," he snarled. "The guild doesn't forgive, human." Kelvin stood in the doorway, breathing hard but steady, watching until they vanished into the shadows. The street fell silent again, but the air was heavy with the promise of more violence. Slowly, he turned back inside, and Lyra was still frozen, her face pale, her body shaking. She stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, not just a human who bought her, but a man who fought for her. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You risked your life." Kelvin sat down, wiping the blood from his knuckles, his tone calm. "Family is worth the risk." The word family struck her harder than the fight. Her tears fell freely, and she crawled to him, not out of fear, but out of something new, trust so deep it hurt. For the first time in her life, she leaned against someone without terror, her body shaking but her heart burning with hope. Outside, the guild prepared their revenge. But inside that small room, something stronger than chains had been forged. A promise, silent but unbreakable, that no matter what came, Kelvin and Lyra would stand together. The night after the fight was long and heavy. Kelvin sat by the table, his knuckles still raw, his body sore but steady. Lyra curled on the bed, her eyes wide open, unable to sleep. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every shadow in the street made her heart pound. She feared the slave guild would break down the door again, drag her back to the cages, tear away the fragile hope she had found. But when the suns rose, the world outside was quiet. The city carried on with its usual chaos, machines grinding, traders shouting, ships lifting into the sky. For everyone else, it was another day, but for Lyra, it was a miracle. She had survived the night without chains, without being dragged back into the dark. And when she looked at Kelvin, sitting calmly with a cup of bitter tea, she realized something deeper. She was not alone anymore. Kelvin met her eyes, his voice calm as always. "We'll need to be careful now." She nodded, her throat tight. "They will come back," she whispered. He set the cup down, his gaze steady. "Then we'll be ready." The way he said we made her heart ache in a way she had never felt before. In the days that followed, she grew stronger. Kelvin trained her quietly, showing her how to hold a blade, how to move her feet, how to strike with speed instead of strength. At first, her hands shook too much to grip the weapon, but he was patient, guiding her, letting her fail and try again. And each time she improved, even a little, he gave her a nod that filled her with pride. For the first time, she was learning not only to survive, but to fight back. The bond between them deepened in silence and in action. She cleaned his tools, and he showed her how to repair small parts. She cooked simple meals, and he tasted each one without complaint, even when it was clumsy. Sometimes they even laughed, soft and quiet, at small mistakes or old stories he shared about his youth. Lyra's smile returned slowly, fragile at first, but growing stronger with every passing day. But danger had not forgotten them. One evening, smoke rose in the distance, slave guild torches burning as a warning. They had not attacked yet, but their message was clear. They were watching, waiting. Lyra froze when she saw the smoke, fear clawing at her chest. She whispered, "They will kill you for me." Kelvin shook his head, his voice calm but firm. "No, Lyra, they will fail." That night, she sat across from him at the table, her eyes shining with tears she could no longer hold back. "You should have left me in the cage," she whispered. "I was worthless, broken. You risked everything." Kelvin leaned forward, his tone strong. "You are not worthless. You never were." He paused, his voice softer. "2 credits bought you from them, but to me you are priceless." The words shattered the last chains around her heart. She broke into sobs, not from despair, but from release. She crawled forward and took his hands in hers, trembling but firm. For the first time, she dared to believe she was more than what the guild had told her, more than broken teeth and scars. She was Lyra, and she was family. The next morning, they shared food at the table like equals. Kelvin poured her water first, and she served him bread with steady hands. It was simple, but it felt sacred, a bond sealed not by chains but by choice. Outside, the guild still plotted. They would come again, and the danger was not gone. But something had changed forever. The broken girl who once hid in a cage now stood beside a human who had chosen her. And together, they were no longer weak. In a quiet glow of dawn, Lyra whispered the words that had lived inside her heart since the night he called her family. "Thank you for giving me a life." Kelvin smiled faintly, his voice steady as ever. "No, Lyra, thank you for giving me one too." And so, in that small home under the twin suns, a new beginning was born. Not of slavery, not of chains, but of hope, trust, and a bond stronger than fear. A beginning that promised, no matter what storms came, they would face them together. A human and an alien, bound not by money or power, but by something far greater, family.